Hello, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson, and I am so thrilled to welcome you to today's webinar event with Pam McLean, the author of a brand new book called Self as Coach, Self as Leader. Welcome, Pam.
Hello, great to be here with everyone.
Great to have you. So as we get started, I want to share a few technical considerations with you. Many of you are joining us via Zoom, and we'll be broadcasting here this whole hour on Zoom, and we also will be broadcasting simultaneously to Facebook. We want to invite you to find the chat. We love the chance to interact with you during the webinar, and toward the end of the hour, you will have the chance to type in some questions that I will share with Pam. And so if you can take a moment to find the chat panel, and please select to chat to all panelists and attendees so that we can all be engaging with one another on today's event. So take a moment, find the chat. I know many of you are already here. We'd love to hear where you're calling in from, and welcome Gilda in Brazil, welcome to Gary in California and Chicago and Wisconsin. Thanks. And if there are any of you today who are joining with your organization to take part in this webinar as a professional development opportunity, we would love to know the name of your organization and also maybe how many folks are gathered in the room. You know, I love to think about you all gathered around a conference table in your Zoom room, ready to learn together. And boy, these welcomes are coming in so fast. I can't possibly read them all, but I do see London, I see Barcelona, and I see some people mentioning there's a team of 3 from Ohio Health. Welcome to those of you at Ohio Health. Welcome from The Hague. Wow, okay. And wow, it looks like we have a really great international and domestic audience, and we're so thrilled that you have chosen to invest in learning in this hour with us. A couple of other things. Many times folks ask if we're going to share the slides. Yes, we will share the slides as a PDF after today's event. We also will have a recording of today's event. So in the event that you have a colleague who could learn from Pam and her insights, you can feel free to share this link once it's available with as many people as you would like. And welcome in the Philippines. Not sure what time it is there, but wow, thank you for joining us all the way from Asia. So really, truly thrilled that you're all here. What we want to do as we get started, first, I'm going to introduce Pam. Then we have a couple of polls so that we can get to know a little bit about you. Then we're going to have a conversation about the key concepts from Pam's book. And then later on in the hour, you will have the chance to put your questions and comments into the chat. And we would welcome you to do that throughout today's event. So at any point, please make sure you're selecting all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your comments. So again, I'm thrilled to welcome Pam McLean. She is the author of a brand new book called Self as Coach, Self as Leader. She's also the CEO of the Hudson Institute, which is based in Santa Barbara, California. She's a master coach and a clinical psychologist. So Pam, I'm so glad that we have this chance to learn together today.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So as we get started, we would love to learn a little bit more about all of you, and I'm about to launch a poll. And the first questions are you a coach or are you in a leadership role? And we have multiple choice. We'd love to know, maybe you're a coach and a leader, and you could select that answer. And then we're also curious how many of you have had the opportunity to experience coaching. I have, and coaches have made an immense difference in my life and business. So we would love to hear from you. Have you had a coach? And then are you a coach or are you in a leadership role? And I'm going to give you a few more moments. Pam, how old were you when you had your first coach? I'm curious because I know coaching is a fairly new field.
Well, yeah, it is. So it's probably been fairly recent in the last 20 plus years. And like you, it has made a very big difference many times in my life.
Yeah. Wonderful. So it looks like many of you have voted, so I'm going to go ahead and share those results with you. It looks like about a third of you who are on today's call are coaches. About a third are in a leadership role, and more than 40% of you are both. So that means actually that about 70% of you are coaches today, so the content will be quite relevant to you. And a huge majority of us have had a coach, so that's exciting to see. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts about those results, Pam?
Fantastic. For me, when I see the number of you who have had coaching, it is an indicator of how mainstream coaching has become and how much we know about how this can be helpful to us at any point in our career in life. So it's great to see.
Well, I'm thrilled to dive into the content with you, Pam. And we wanted to start out a little bit by talking about the uniqueness of your book topic. And it's curious to me. I know that you covered this topic of self as coach in your handbook of coaching that came out in 2012, but this isn't a topic that we hear a lot about. Why do you think it is that this topic hasn't been covered in this way before?
Great question, Becky. I think that some of what happened for me, first of all, when I wrote the book, The Handbook of Coaching, I had often used, and we had here at Hudson in our work, where we spend a lot of our time working with leaders who want to become coaches or who want to learn coaching skills. We had so often used this phrase, self as coach. And it was my editor who said to me, you need a model for that. And I spent months wrestling with what this is. And you see here on the screen this quote by a colleague who has dedicated her life as a coach to coaching supervision. And she coined this phrase, who you are is how you coach. And what has happened for me over 25, 30 years in working with leaders who want to become coaches is that we notice that we can teach skill-based competencies. We can require people to really become knowledgeable about concepts and theories that inform coaching. And yet there is this how we show up that makes all the difference. And that's true whether we are a leader or a coach. And we hear so much about self-awareness. We know that the work of many people in the domain of emotional intelligence, EQ, has been prominent in the fields of leadership and coaching. This is a slightly broader look at who you are. It's really what's under the surface. I sometimes talk about the internal landscape. We could even think about these domains as being meta skills, those higher order skills that are about how we do our work, not what we know, not the skills that we have been able to learn, but how we implement those. And so this work has applicability, of course, for any coach. And those of you, 75% of you on this call who have received coaching, I'm sure you have these experiences, in particular if you've had more than one coach, noticing the different ways that a coach shows up and how that impacts the nature and the quality of our interaction with them. And I think we can say that the very same thing about leadership. You can be well equipped with all of the technical skills in the world to be a great leader. And yet it is the soft skills that turn out to be the differentiators. When I think about common leadership issues, the person who is too far removed from their people or too directive or too focused on I, those are really those meta skills. So I think we have talked about these in all kinds of different ways over the last 20, 25 years. This is a way of looking at a broad group of meta skills that really allow us to do our very best work.
Sure. So I noticed a little bit of confusion in the chat. When you talk about self as coach, Pam, you're not saying you're going to learn how to coach yourself, but you're really talking about the individual as a coach using their self as an instrument in the coaching. So can you maybe dive a bit more into that? And what does it mean that yourself is as an instrument, the most important one in your coaching?
Well, first of all, our work is highly relational as we're coaching. And frankly, I think this is true in leadership, that our work is so relational. And so often over the years, we find that people who want to take on coaching skills want to know, what are the tools? Give me a tool chest. Give me some instruments. And what we often say is, the most important instrument is you. The most important tool we have is ourself. And when someone in the chat, I wasn't catching that, but said, is this about coaching yourself? In some ways it is, right? So when we develop ourself, our internal landscape, such that we can really show up in ways that make it possible for us to have the important conversations, to do the most relevant work. That requires that we really turn up the awareness dial and learn some things about ourselves. So back to who you are is how you coach. We have to know who we are. And one of the things that's so interesting about who we are is the reality that we all bring stories into our lives. And these stories are really formed in our earliest years in life. And these stories are often become invisible to us, and we drag them into our adult years. And they become self-limiting. A bit of a prison for us. And so to know our stories, and as coaches, to help our clients see their stories, really creates the opportunity for more choices about how we want to show up in the world.
Sure. Well, I want to highlight a comment from Jason, apparently someone you've worked with before, who said that your comment, your presence is an intervention, really stuck with our team while working with you. So I don't know if you'd like to comment on that.
Sure. And I, hello to all of the great people at Ohio Health. This phrase was coined by a colleague of mine, Dorothy Siminovich, and I have always found it to be so powerful. The notion that our presence is an intervention in and of itself. That means that the moment we walk into a conversation, whether it is here on Zoom, or it is on the phone, or it is in person, our presence is seen by another. And it is read very rapidly. Am I all here? Am I able to be fully present here in this moment with you? Am I able to put my own agenda on the shelf and hear what's true for you? And in the work of these domains, one of the things about presence that I think most of us find difficult as human beings is that we have a hard time putting our own agenda aside. We so often will hear someone bring something to the conversation, and our natural instinct is to kind of go inside and go, when does that happen to me? Oh, yes, I know something very similar that has happened to me, and I want to tell you about that, or I want to tell you what I think you ought to do based on what my experience is. And what we know in coaching and in leadership is that if I can be present to what this means to you, we're going to have a much more meaningful conversation. If I can be present to how you experience this and keep my own experiences out of the equation, the way that we connect is going to be much more profound.
I wonder, Pam, if you have any suggestions as it relates to presence, if we're coaches or leaders who want to get more effective at showing up in the moment and not having our own agendas. Do you have any input or advice? I'm actually doing the opposite. You say we shouldn't bring our advice. I'm asking you to bring advice. But what recommendations would you have for leaders who want to get better at this?
I think there's one practice that we could all universally apply that would be helpful at any stage in our work, in our own development. And that is to simply notice how we show up now. So if I am someone who loves to problem solve, and a lot of us spend a whole lot of our career problem solving, quite different than what it takes to be a great coach or to really develop others as a leader. But if that has been my tendency, then the first step is to notice how often I do that. Just the practice of noticing what I'm doing now and paying attention to where the cost is, where the advantages are. And once I'm really able to see, boy, about 80% of the time, I am telling someone what I think they ought to do. There was a wonderful woman we worked with over a period of time who said at the end of some work, I have been in the role of leading teams for a long time. I thought I knew what my team wanted and what was on their minds. But since I have started really honing my presence and asking a whole lot more than I'm telling, I realize how little I have known. Now that's profound to consider this as a leader, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So
But
Daniel is asking, is presence the equivalent of mindfulness? So when you say presence, Pam, is it mindfulness or is it something somewhat different?
I think mindfulness is a practice that can help extend, enlarge our presence. Our presence is multifaceted. It is my presence to my own inner chatter, to all of my biases and assumptions that I bring into this world because I'm a human being. And when I have turned up my awareness dial, which can happen through the practice of meditation or mindfulness, I can start to make different choices. I can show up in different ways. So there's that presence to our inner chatter that is a continual process for all of us. And then there's that presence to the relationship in front of us. The when two people come together, it really makes this third entity. And being able to be present to what we're creating right here now gives us a different view into our work. And I write in the book as well about presence to our ecology, meaning all that surrounds us. So I'm sure most people on this call either are inside complex organizations or are coaching leaders inside those organizations. We need to know some things about the system that we're entering or that we're in. And we also have to have an appreciation for the complexities of the world that we're living in, which can look different in London than they do in South Africa or in Brazil or here in the US.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful. So to go back to where we started, I would love to hear a little bit more about what's different in your book compared to those books that might cover EQ. And you did mention EQ a little bit earlier in the conversation. So help us see a little bit more about how the self as coach approach is different than just emotional intelligence work.
Yeah, so I bring up here on the screen some wonderful work on vertical development that many on this call might be familiar with. And you'll notice I credit Nick Petrie at CCL with some of this work. The notion that in our work, we need both vertical and horizontal development. And that the horizontal is everything I read. It is all of the skills, the competency-based skills that I have learned. It's all the tools in my toolkit. But the vertical development is about how I show up and how I make meaning of things. And so this is really our internal landscape. Is that it's like if my challenge that I bring to you as a leader is that I have a lot of trouble standing up and delivering in front of teams of people and groups. And I have all of the technical skills. I've got the slide deck. I've got the talking points. All of that works. But once I get up and stand in front of people, I get wobbly. It's hard for me to show up in a way that other people can really take in my wisdom. And so as a coach, when we work with someone like this to help them figure out what needs to shift and change in order for that person to stand up and be strong and take up the space they need to take up and really get themselves grounded and feel confident and manage those voices in their head that might be saying some things that are less than supportive. We are changing the way that leader will work forever. So these meta skills are those that change how we show up in all ways, and so we need both. And the work of the internal landscape, the self as coach, really focuses on this vertical development domain.
So Pam, it really feels like you're talking about doing the hard work, because when you reference, competencies or what we know in horizontal development, that's the kind of thing, you can check off a box. But when you reference vertical development, it feels like you're really talking about the hard work that we each have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like if I go back to the, let me go back here to the self as coach, and we see this notion of boundaries, which sounds kind of odd, right? How would that be a meta skill? And yet what we know is that if I am someone who hears another's issue, and I want to put on my cape and go in to rescue you, that I have lost my boundary, and that is not necessarily, or in most cases, going to serve the other. It's certainly not going to help someone else grow and develop. And if as well my boundaries on that porous side, I hear you talking about how the real issue is you have an impossible boss. And I go, oh, wow, that is awful. How could that happen to you? I'm colluding with you in your story as opposed to helping you see that story. And we could look at the same in the empathy area, that, the role of empathy in our work is critical. It's really bedrock. We can do very little without a strong connection. In the work of psychology, it's talked about the working alliance. We have to have that to talk about things that are harder to talk about. And I think about empathy as being on a continuum, and that we can be in that overly empathic zone where I hear what you're talking about. I hear the pain you're going through, and I feel it. I take it home with me. I lose sleep over it. I want to call you tomorrow and see how you're doing. Or on the other end, where you tell me about something that is really critical in your life, and I just move on to the next topic. I don't even make a connection. And so in our work, finding our middle zone, finding our balance, so we have enough, but not too much. So that I use this phrase, I don't know if this works for others, but learning to walk in someone's shoes without wearing them. Really imagining what the experience of another human being is without taking it on. That's what helps us be at our best.
Well, I don't know if this,
I think that is the harder work for all of us.
So would this be a good time to launch that poll related to boundaries and see?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we do have another poll, and that's related to this topic of boundaries. And the question is, do you find yourself getting involved in your client's story, wanting to rescue your client or at least help them solve their situation? Yes, no, or sometimes. And this is the moment of truth.
And the moment of remembering that we're all human. So, right?
Yes, of course. Yeah, as I was listening to you, I thought about some of my own coaching experiences and how magical it is to be the one who's coached when there is that middle ground of empathy without someone trying to solve your issues, or, without the person just moving on to whatever's next.
Yeah.
So here's what we have. It looks like about a third of you say yes, you find yourself getting involved in your client's story. About 4%, a very small number, are saying no, and 70% of us sometimes experience this.
Yeah, yeah. And different, we all have different triggers as well. So, Eva from Rio, hello, Eva, asks the great question, what is the role of compassion in self as coach? And it really is. I have one slide here that I think it gets a little bit to the heart of that, Eva. That you can't pour from an empty cup. So that notion, and Otto Scharmer's wonderful quote, that the success of an intervention depends on the inner condition of the intervener. In the research that has been done in empathy, one of the connections that's made that is very interesting is that self-care, the way we take care of ourselves, actually impacts our ability to be empathic with another human being. And this is, in the world we're living in, I think a particularly important topic. There is some wonderful work of a woman in the UK by the name of Claire Bree. She talks about this notion that we do not take seriously our recovery time. So most of us on this call are likely quite familiar with the experience of, I've just got 2 weeks ahead that I've just got to get through. Just really tough. And so that happens, that's real. But how do we recover? And the notion that recovery is not a vacation that you take twice a year, but it's something that we do every day. And it's not the glass of wine at the end of the day. It is the ways that we build in our resilience, our willingness to take a step back and see what is it that I need right now. So I think there's a very strong connection between our capacity to do good work with others and our ability to take good care of ourselves.
Would you be willing to give us a glimpse into what that looks like for you, Pam?
Well, yeah. So I write about it in my book that I have this practice that I do every morning. I call it Good Morning Sun. So I am a very early riser by nature. I am blessed with looking at the Pacific Ocean when I awaken in the morning. And I do not, the first thing I do not do in the morning is look at email. So I go downstairs, I make myself a cup of coffee, I come upstairs, and I wait for the sun to come up. And that is a way that I take care of myself. I say, I am more than my work. I am a whole person, and I want to make space for that. I definitely do some mindfulness practices. I also do some embodiment practices that I find very helpful on a regular basis. And in all honesty, I've probably, I'm not sure that I could have said what I'm saying right now 10 or 15 years ago. So it's taken me some time to get to this place.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for sharing yours. If there are those who are on the chat who want to share some of your own self-care practices, that might be something interesting for all of us to share together as we keep moving through the conversation. Pam, I would love to spend a moment. Can you tell us a little bit about how you see people and their personal experiences getting in the way of their being the most successful coaches and leaders they can be?
Sure. Yes, I'm happy to talk about that, and I always want to as well remember that we're all in development, and so this is a journey. There is no destination. This is a journey. I think that one thing that can hinder us as a coach and as a leader is wanting to be liked, is wanting to please. And when we want to be liked, we change what we say and how we show up. And so that's one that we have to pay attention to with ourselves, to notice if that's at play for me. I think that wanting to be right is a challenge, right? I think wanting to fix it gets in the way. Wanting to see everything as a problem to be solved. I say in our coaching work with people, we are not solving problems as coaches. We're developing people. We're helping people grow in areas that matter to them. And that's vastly different than solving problems.
Wow. Can we say that again? So
Yeah.
you're saying coaches are
We're
not
not
solving
solving
problems.
problems. Yeah,
You're
we're not
developing
solving
people.
people. Yeah, yeah. Your relationship to how you solve problems might be interesting to explore, but we're helping people grow in ways that matter to them, and that changes our mindset. It's a paradigm shift to think about that.
Yeah, that is really powerful. I feel like I want to write that one down. So thank you, Pam.
Yeah.
So many great comments of people on self-care. So let's talk a little bit about how important it is to know how other people experience you when you're a coach or a leader, because you just mentioned something. It was hard for me to hear that if we want to be liked, it influences how we show up. But I think that there is this important dynamic in your book, Pam, about being aware of how people receive us and how that can influence our effectiveness. So can we spend a few minutes talking about that?
Yeah. So there is that notion that for most of us, there's a decent distance between our intention and our impact, right? What we intend for others to see or receive in how we are showing up can be quite different than the impact. And there's only one way for us to get onto that, and that's by getting feedback. And you know, those of you that remember the amazing, great Edie Seashore, I will always remember Edie Seashore saying, the best feedback you can get, forget 360s, forget stakeholder, the best feedback you can get is the feedback you ask for directly. How am I doing? How could I do better? You know, how am I showing up for you? What can't I see that you can see that would be helpful to me? Mm-hmm. And I just think that this is work for all of us forever. And it requires some practice to routinely engage in getting that feedback and asking people who are willing to be candid with you about this.
So why don't we ask?
It's scary. It's scary, or it is the case that I think I've got it. I know because I know what my intentions are, and we live inside of cultures, or we live inside of old belief systems where that just didn't happen, and so it's outside of our comfort zone. It is territory that we tiptoe into. You know, look at all of the ways that we have in the leadership domain created opportunities for people to give feedback to us at a distance anonymously. And if we could simply cultivate cultures and ways of being coaches where this is second nature. I am doing this on a routine basis. That is a powerful way to help us stay awake and to grow.
That's useful. I'm taking a lot of notes. I'm sure that those on the call are as well. And the thing that you said recently that stood out so much, Pam, is that this is work for all of us forever.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to courage. I mean, you showed courage on the model at the beginning, but you didn't necessarily speak to that. Maybe that would be a good topic.
Yeah, so we need courage to be coaches. And someone, Lisa Orlick, hi Lisa, asked about how I have integrated Hetty Eitzig's work, or certainly the Peter Hawkins. Hetty, who wrote this great book, The Future of Coaching, a UK resource, it talks about this notion that I love. She goes, we can't be creating this comfy, cozy space in coaching, right? We have to have some, I call it heat. We have to have some heat, and we have to have some tension to really wake up to that which is slightly beneath the surface. And for us as coach, that takes courage to say things that to share observations, to share observations of patterns that we see. The client who says regularly, that's just the way I am. I mean, people have to understand that's just the way I am. And to be able to say with heart, this is where, heart, empathy, and courage really go together, to be able to say, I want to just step back with you and notice how often you say that phrase. Could we look at that together? Could we see what that means to you? Or could we take that apart? So that requires a little bit of courage. And in our work as coaches and as leaders, we need courage, because that is one of the ways that we actually add value, that we help people grow. And of course, it matters how we engage when we want to share something that's a little bit tough to share. And so it's not, again, that horizontal development, here's a piece of feedback to give. It's that vertical development of how am I going to offer this in a way that someone might be able to consider it. And so that notion of using heart, our empathy, is particularly important in these times.
That's useful. So Pam, I know you might have a few more slides. We're about to the place where we can go back to some of these questions that have been coming in, or maybe some more that will come in. And there are lots of comments, so I'll do my best. If you do have a question that you posted earlier and you want to repost it so that we see it. But Pam, are there any other slides that you wanted to get to before we switch to taking some of these questions that have been coming in?
No, I think we're good.
Okay. Well, I particularly wanted to ask this question that came in from Jeanette, and I'm trying to scroll back to it. So Jeanette mentions that in working with executives, it seems that theirs is a lonely existence at work. So how do you recommend navigating serving as a coach and acting as their source of true confidant listening post?
Well, I think being a leader is lonely, and it is one of the great gifts of coaching with leaders, and I think that we can do both. That when we are coaching a leader, we are also listening, and sometimes in the world of coaching, people will say, I'll do a coaching demonstration, for example, and people will say, "Oh gosh, that seems kind of therapeutic," and I go, "Well, listening is therapeutic, right?" So it turns out most of us are not deeply listened to in the world we're living in very often, and of course, we see a lot of research on the ways that we're communicating are less and less personal, and so to be listened to deeply. I think is a profound experience for that leader who is lonely at the top. And it is complementary to the work that we're doing and integrated into it in our work as coach.
That's helpful. So for those who are listening, who are thinking about that vertical development, I think that working on listening, would that fall into that vertical development that we need to do?
Yeah.
How we show up. Wow, so many comments. And
there's another one. As a leader, what are some ideas on how to cultivate a culture like you're talking about with ongoing feedback or feed forward? My comment about that is that we are the culture, that it is in our individual interactions that we create culture. And so your own ability to find ways to start to build that within your team will start to impact that culture. And that's a worthy venture for us.
Thank you. There's a question that came up earlier that I wanted to circle back to, Pam. Someone was asking if you have any input or advice about how someone could find the right coach, or find a coach who might be awake to some of these considerations that you're mentioning.
Well, so going back to 75% of you on this call have had coaches. That's pretty impressive, and I'm guessing that many of you have engaged in the process of interviewing a coach. We know that the chemistry matters, and that what might work for you might not work for me. So taking the time to do some chemistry checks with 2 or 3 coaches to see where does it feel comfortable to you, that's going to be very, very helpful. And asking questions, you're investing in a coaching engagement. It needs to work for you. And so taking your time up front to find the person who's going to be best for you.
Thanks, Pam. That's useful. So I have a couple of people who have asked the question of the difference between a coach and a therapist and where that line is.
Yeah. Well, I spent 25 years in both worlds. One, the first 25 as a clinical psychologist, and these as a coach. And I think that there are a couple of useful comments to make here. One is that there is much that coaches can learn from the field of psychology, and there's much that psychology can learn from coaches. The broad brush comment I would make about distinctions is that while we know in coaching we live in stories, and we know we're going to, if we're doing that developmental work, we're going to be looking at those old stories and how they impact us. We're not necessarily going back and taking apart the entire family structure, which could happen in psychotherapy. We also know that in coaching, our work is with people who are really very effective in their lives and in their roles. And in the world of psychotherapy, it is very common to be working with people who are challenged by mental health issues that make life really hard. And that's the space of the work of a clinical psychologist. That's different than the work of a coach. I think sometimes a coach can find themselves in a situation where they're coaching a leader, and they know that the work that they're doing is aligned with the work of a coach. And yet what gets revealed in the coaching is the possibility of maybe it's a serious depression or something like that. And so that coach, I think great coaches make referrals and understand where their expertise is and is not.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Pam. So we also have some follow-up questions from at least 2 people who are wanting to understand more clearly the distinction between a coach and a mentor.
Well, here's what I like to say about this. I think if a great mentor would have coaching skills, and we of course there are all kinds of ways we can look at mentors. One of the ways that I like to consider is the mentors I've had in my life. So consider this, everybody. The mentors you've had in your life who didn't even know they were mentors. And you did not, in the moment, realize that's the role they were playing. But now, 10, 15, 20 years out, you can see these people were important in my life. And in those cases, my hunch for most of us is we had a very strong connection. That mentor was not telling us what to do, but kind of walking beside us.
Mhm.
In what is standard mentoring these days, mentors are assigned most often, and mentors are seen as people who have wisdom and knowledge that they can pass on to you. And often that is, here's my experience and here's what I think you ought to do. Of course, there are enlightened mentoring relationships, but quite different than coaching, where there is not that hierarchical aspect that you're not coming to sit at the feet of a coach and learn from them. And the work that we're doing as coaches is really co-creating together what is going to be important for this particular coachee to focus on.
Hmm. That's helpful. So for those who asked the questions, if you need any additional clarification, feel free to type those in. And again, if there are any questions that came into the chat along the way that have gotten buried by the many, many comments, and we're so thrilled by your engagement, please feel free to copy those and bring them back again to the end. Pam, I'm wondering if you could take a few moments and share what you think maybe the top 2 or 3 important takeaways are that you hope people will get as they read and engage with the book.
Thank you. That's a great question. So I wrote this book, and I considered this book over many years because I've spent so much time working with people who really want to be at their best as coaches and as leaders. And there is so often this invisible terrain, this slightly under the surface way that we show up that becomes the biggest challenge. And so in my work with coaches, what became so clear to me is that this domain, our use of self, our seeing ourself as the most important instrument in our work, is really key to great coaching. And we cannot do this without understanding that we are each on a long-term development journey. We're not accountants. We're not dentists. You know, we're not carpenters where you've got the skill, you've got that horizontal skill and you're set. But rather, we are doing our work in relation to another. And we are growing and changing, and that ability to continually cultivate ourselves, I think is really an ethical practice for us.
Yeah, that's really powerful. There must be that commitment to the ongoing growth and development, it sounds like, Pam, if we're going to be effective in coaching or leading.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that the notion of humility matters.
We did have that question earlier, so thanks for coming back to it.
Great, yeah. I think it matters that we need humility. We need, whether we are a leader or a coach, we have never arrived. There is that notion that this is a journey, there is no destination, and that when we lose our humility, it's highly likely that we lose some of the connection with another human being. So the willingness, and you know, this is the great thing about being a coach or a leader, right? Is that we live in this space that is highly relational. We have to be awake to ourselves to be at our best. And yes, that's hard sometimes, but what a journey to do this. When I was writing the book, I ran across this wonderful work of William James. I'm a fan of the entire James family. And William has often been referred to as the father of psychology. And when he was at Harvard, I don't know, maybe in the 1920s, he talked about this notion of being once born and twice born. That there are people in our lives and in this world who are once born. My interpretation of what he meant is that there is a particular focus on remaining the same, living inside the boundaries of the stories that I bring into this life. And when I encounter a challenging situation or a crisis, I'm going to work very hard to bring that back to what I know, to fit it into that path that I'm on. And the twice born person is the person who, when the opportunity arises to take a risk, they take it. When a crisis occurs and they have a choice of trying to fit this into who they were or saying, that's not who I am anymore, that is a twice born person. And so I think that to do the work we're doing requires that we are interested in being twice born.
Yeah, I was reading actually that in the book before I joined you on the call today, Pam, and I was thinking about how powerful that was, that to be able to be a person who's twice born or 3 times born, you have to be willing to go into the deep forest and then emerge again different. And I think one thing that you wrote that stood out to me was that it's mandatory.
Yeah.
That if we want to be courageous leaders, that we have to be willing to be twice born.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, Warren Bennis, who is considered, I think, the father of leadership development, wrote a book years ago called From Geeks to Geezers. And he was looking at what is it that makes these people under the age of 35 and over the age of 65 remarkable leaders. And to be considered in this pool, you had to have X number of books written about you or something like that. Mm-hmm. And the surprising finding for him was that it wasn't about something that happened at work. It was really about crucible events that they experienced in their personal lives and that changed them and shaped them. And that notion that we learn from the tough times. We learn from the dark times if we're twice born, right? And that helps reshape how we see ourselves and the world around us.
And here's a clarifying question from Margaret. She's asking, how does a twice-born person compare to a Renaissance man?
Well, I don't know the answer to that one.
That's a fun question.
Yeah, that is. I mean, I'm not sure what constitutes a Renaissance man, but I do think that our willingness to disrupt ourselves, to get outside of our comfort zone, to do that in small ways, to do that in bigger ways. In my own life, when I travel, I will travel often solo, and I'll go to places, to cities, countries that I know very little about, and often where I don't speak the language. It's highly disruptive. To be at a train station and wonder exactly where I should put this coin that I have, and that is so important for us. It expands our view of the world. It gives us another view into ourselves.
So it sounds like choosing to go into uncomfortable situations is choosing to stay on that path of continuing to grow, to become better and more self-aware.
Yeah, and I think as well that we can do this by simply taking on new learning. The power of learning in our adult lives is enormous. And sometimes we talk about unlearning, to unlearn our old habits so that we can take on some new ways of being. So, it could be a 6-week class. It could be a year-long endeavor, but new learning gives us different views into ourselves and others.
Yeah, that's huge. I think maybe it's a friend of yours, James, said that he hears you saying the journey is the destination. There are also a few questions, Pam, about your book. I think we mentioned the book at the very beginning of the hour. If people joined late, they might have missed that Pam's new book is called Self as Coach, Self as Leader. It is available on Amazon now, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But for those of you who have been asking, just wanting to make sure you're aware of that. Self as Coach, Self as Leader.
That's great. And I see a few people, Becky, asking about slides. You know, I felt that the conversation was probably the most important thing. But in the book, I will say a couple of things that the book has lots of images of what I'm speaking to. And as well, inside the book, you'll see a link to a website, selfascoach.com, where there are all kinds of resources that are available if you have an interest in some new learning or want to build a little bit of a learning journey for yourself.
Well, and I'm also curious, Pam, I'm sure you have a vision for how this book could be used in organizations in terms of, people learning together from the concepts in the book. Any insights for us about that as we wrap up the time together?
Well, we do some of this. We do use some of this inside organizations, and we do a bit of a self-diagnosis, if you will, around where is my area of development in these dimensions. Where, if I just built a practice to notice how I show up now, and then make some choices about how I want to move the dial, how might that impact me in my role as coach or as leader? So yeah, I think it has a lot of applicability for us in either role.
Well, that sounds interesting and exciting to be able to look at the various dimensions on your model and consider, how to grow and move forward. And using that powerful question that you asked earlier, the most important feedback is the feedback that we ask for directly. So being willing as a coach or as a leader to say, how am I doing? What can I do better?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
You've got a lot of people wishing you some thank yous.
Yeah,
For
that's
those
great.
of you who are curious to talk to Pam more, we do have an upcoming virtual book launch party. I'm not awake to the date at the moment. I think it's during the week that the book is officially available, May 21st.
It is 21. Yeah,
And we'll make sure that everyone does have an invitation to that call. It will be a more intimate chance for you to talk with Pam. Pam, can we go to the slide that has the book on it as we wrap up the hour together? So just a few details here. Can we go back? There we go. Okay, so you can order the book now on Amazon.com. You can learn more and get some resources that can help you implement the ideas from the book at Self as Coach. And if you'd like to email someone at the Hudson Institute, you can do that by using info@hudsoninstitute.com. As I mentioned earlier, we will have a recording of today's session that you are free to share. And when I send out the follow-up email, we will also send the PDF of these slides so that you can access them. Pam, there were some other resources that you mentioned throughout the call, different books and authors and ideas. And so we may want to collaborate so that we can share that list. A lot of folks were really wanting to be able to hear about those resources later.
Right, right, and it's highly likely in the next week or two that's a great reminder, Becky, that some of those we could put a list of resources right up on that selfascoach.com page for people as well.
Okay, perfect. So Pam, any kind of parting wisdom for those who would like to join you on this journey of being one who's able to use the tool of self more effectively in coaching and leading?
I think the most important thing I would say is that I am moved by all of these good wishes in this chat room. Thank you so much for everyone for joining the call and for offering up good questions and good wishes. And I hope you'll find the book. If you choose to purchase it, a great read and a helpful resource, knowing that it is just one more resource for this journey that we're on as leaders and coaches.
Wonderful, Pam. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everybody.